hello, my name is Cassidy. You can find me at Cassidy on Twitter, GitHub, CodePen, LinkedIn, all kinds of stuff. So go ahead and reach out if you'd like. And I want to talk today about kind of building up your resume, your cover letter, and things to help you prep for getting a job. And this is a bit more high level for tech jobs in general, but then afterwards I want to talk a bit more about specific web dev roles. So these are those 4 points we'll cover. Again, resume, cover letter, skills, and then your job search in general. So in terms of your resume, so your resume is your personal summary sheet. It's something that's not supposed to be huge. It's not supposed to be filled with tons and tons of detail. That's what your cover letter is for, and that's what your interview is for. Your resume is just supposed to say, here's a very high level overview. And I think a lot of people mix that up when they're actually applying for places. They think that their resume should have absolutely everything, but really just include the highlights. Your name should be the biggest thing on the page. And this is something that a lot of people don't often do because they would rather have just a ton of content, but you want someone to remember your name. You want them to think, okay, what was that person who had this amount of content on their resume, who knew that skill, who knew what. Your name should stick in people's minds, and it should be the biggest thing on the page. It should stand out in some way. This is probably my most controversial piece of advice: removing the objective. If you are not going for something unusual, you don't need an objective. So many times when I look at someone who clearly has the experience of a web developer, a computer science student or something, their objective is to get a software engineering job. And that is very, very obvious. Unless you have an unusual background or you're going for an unusual role, the objective won't necessarily help you. And so this is controversial, but think about it with that in mind. If what you are showing and what you are applying for is obvious based on your experience, then you don't need an objective on your resume. And that can save you a lot of space if you're populating it with other things. Definitely keep this to a single page. Your resume, once you have a decent amount of experience, and when I say a decent amount, I mean like 5 years or more of experience, that's when recruiters are a little more flexible about resumes that are longer. But if you are kind of just starting out, if you're a student, even if you do have a ton of internships and side projects in your experience, you should keep it to a single page. Recruiters read resumes all the time, and they don't want to flip through multiple pages of a resume. And sometimes they do physically print it out. A lot of things are digital now, so it's different, but they do print it out and they do send it to interview candidates or interviewers for the interview candidate. And so keeping things to a single page, it ensures that you're giving a high level summary and you're not just, word dumping all over the place. You want the recruiters to be able to get a good level of summary just at a glance and be able to say thumbs up or thumbs down very quickly. Obviously you want a thumbs up, and doing a single page, that is a really big key for that. Also, removing irrelevant information. And this kind of ties in with the objective thing. If you are really focused on getting some kind of role that, for example, let's just say you're changing careers and you started off in one role and then you're switching to another role, you don't want to have that you were a lifeguard in high school on your resume if you're going for a tech job. I was a lifeguard in high school, and that was something that I did include on my resume early on in my college career. And recruiters were just like, why would you include this? And I would help out with certain things on campus, but it wasn't necessarily related to the jobs I was going for. And so, especially as you're populating it with more content that's specific to the role, you don't need to include that you were a babysitter or that you did all of these roles or all of these gigs. It's good to show that you're well-rounded, but if you need to make space, removing the irrelevant stuff is very important. And along the same lines too, don't make it a scavenger hunt. Don't hide your skills. Don't make it so that way a recruiter has to look all over the place and be just like, okay, what technologies did they use on this project, or where did they work again? Don't make them have to hunt and peck. Try to make it very concise and easy to navigate. In terms of personal information, you don't necessarily need to include things like your mailing address. That is something that a tech company can find out about you once you've gotten the role. They don't need to know that. Include something like your email, maybe your phone number, depending on the company, and then your GitHub, your Twitter, your LinkedIn, things like that. You don't need to put all of that personal information out there. And in the days of internet security, this is the kind of thing where you want to watch out. You don't want to dox yourself. I had made the mistake of making my resume public, and I had my phone number on there once in the past, and unfortunately that was used by some unkind folks. And so this is something that you do have to be careful about. It's good to have this personal information and maybe make it so a public version is different from a private version that you're actually giving to companies specifically rather than putting out there on the internet. But this is something to note. In terms of your cover letter is different from your resume because this is going to have a lot more information about you. It's not just a summary, it's kind of giving a little bit more details. And it sounds very basic, but these basic questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how, you want to say who you are, what you bring to the table, when you're available, where you're coming from, why you're interested, how they can reach you. You want to make sure you cover all of these different points in your cover letter. And I actually have some templates that I've written for cover letters before, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But this, basically your cover letter should answer these questions. You should introduce yourself. You should say, I think that this is what I could bring to the company based on what I know about you. This is when I'm available to chat. This is when I can start a role as soon as this date. I'm coming from X town and I'm coming from school, or I'm coming from a previous role. I'm interested because I like what you have on your website here, or the technologies that you use, or your position in the tech industry, and also, again, how people can reach you in terms of that contact information. And so the cover letter, a lot of people think, oh, well, nobody reads those, so why include them? Always include them, because you never know if they will read them. When I was hiring a lot of people, I read every single cover letter that came in, and almost every single time the person we ended up hiring was someone who took the time to write a cover letter. Even if it's a cover letter template that you've made for yourself where you just kind of populate in certain things, that's really useful, and it's something that hiring managers, recruiters, etc. will notice. In terms of skills, there are a variety of skills that you need to have. In terms of what you need to build in those skills, these are generally the things that you need to do for job interviews. Knowing your data types, like differences between objects and arrays. It kind of sounds simple, but it's good. It's important, and you will be asked on that. Understanding specific sorting algorithms, time complexities. Even if you're searching for a web dev job, depending on the company that you're talking to, they will be asking some of these questions. And there have been times I've been doing web development for quite a while now. Knowing these kinds of sorting algorithms sometimes really helps solve certain problems. So they're good to know anyway, but also it's especially good to know for the interview. And knowing the basics of the job that you're applying for as well is important. If you're applying, for example, to an Angular job or a React job or a Vue job or something, you should know the basics of Angular or React or Vue. You should know how to use it and at least generally why certain things work the way that they do. And also, as you're practicing these problems, try to be able to do them without computer help. In this day and age, because of coronavirus, a lot of problems you can do on a computer, and you'll be typing in your editor and it'll do a lot of tabbing for you and autocomplete and stuff, but you never know. There are actually some companies, for example, Amazon has been experimenting with it, where they'll actually have you point your webcam at a piece of paper as you write things down, which is wild, but it happens. And so definitely make sure that you can do a problem without looking things up, without having an editor help you, because it's good to just have that ingrained in your brain. And so knowing this content is important. In terms of selling your skills, it's very similar again with this who, what, when, where, why, and how. You want to be able to talk about each of your skills in a way that you're becoming a salesperson for yourself. You want to be able to answer, what did you make? Who did you work with when you made it? Did you work alone or on a team? What was your role in the team? Why did you build X, Y, or Z? Even if it was a homework assignment, just why did you build it? How did you make it? What tools did you use for it? When did you do this? Was this something you built in the last year or several years ago? You want to be able to answer these questions in terms of every single project you're talking about, every single story you have, and really answer these questions. And there's that thing called the STAR method where I forget the name of all of it, but or what the acronym stands for. Basically, if there's a problem, describe the problem, explain how you solved the problem, what your role was in solving the problem, and the result at the end of that. And then in terms of the actual job search itself, my favorite way to be able to connect with jobs and opportunities is through events. And that is because at events, whether they're online or in person, there's so many options, both online and offline in terms of events. There's hackathons, there's meetups, there's conferences, there's career fairs, there's so many just different little coffee chat groups that end up becoming like lunch and learns digitally. And when you go to these types of events, you immediately have a connection with the people who went to these events, and you can build a nice network where you get to know people in the industry. And it's super helpful to have those connections because you never know if that person will be able to introduce you to a recruiter, or if that person is a recruiter themselves, or if that person knows someone who's hiring someone else. You never know what your connections can bring. And so going to these events are really important. And oftentimes when I talk about this, people ask, well, how the heck do I find these events? There's options. First of all, your school, if you are in college right now, you have no idea how many events your school has that you don't necessarily know about. There have been so many times just in my past when I was in school, and I have a bunch of relatives, cousins and stuff who are still in college now who had no idea, and I had no idea that some tech event was happening. Or for example, my college advisor had a relationship with some recruiters at this one tech company and I had no idea. And she, after talking with my college advisor, she was able to connect me to events around the country, and I just didn't know. Your school is an amazing resource. Websites like meetup.com and Eventbrite, even in the era of a pandemic, have all kinds of events that are happening for tech folks. And especially because everyone is online right now, there's a lot more opportunities to get connected. One, for example, that's here in Seattle, there's this one meetup that used to meet every 2 weeks in person, and now they're doing it offline, where all they do is practice interview questions together, where someone gives a question and people work on it. And now all of those meetups are online, so you can do that from anywhere, not just in Seattle, and not only get to know people, but build bonds with people, and also to get some good practice in. And then of course, Major League Hacking. They run great events, they run great hackathons, and I've known a lot of the people on the team there, and I think they're great. And their website is chock full of events as well. One thing that I've mentioned a lot at these events is networking. This is probably the most essential thing that you can do while job hunting. When you build a community, whether it's in tech or elsewhere, you are more likely to stay in a community and be successful in a community if you know others in it. And networking is a really, really big part of that. And that involves introducing yourself at events, making small talk, and exchanging contact information. And this can happen online too, just getting to know someone, even if it's like a few tweets in an exchange, or DMing someone saying, hey, I thought it was really cool that you gave this talk at this event. Thanks so much. Exchanging that contact information is good, because then you can say, okay, I'll email you sometime. But then the following up is the biggest thing here. When you follow up with someone, that is immediately making a connection that it might not lead to anything. Sometimes it's just saying, hey, it was really great meeting you. See you later. But that little follow-up can be a game changer. And for myself, a lot of the things that I've done in my career would not have happened if it weren't for following up. An example of that is, for example, when I was in my junior year of college, I went to a hackathon that a company was sponsoring. It was AT&T, I think. They were sponsoring some weekend hackathon. I went there and hacked around, got some business cards from people, and then when I got home, I just went through the business cards and emailed people saying, hey, it was nice to meet you, thanks, just to those people, and then thought nothing of it. I was just doing my follow-up. And then a week later, I found out about this really big hackathon that was going to be on a plane. And I thought, oh, dang, that would be really cool to get into. Someone I knew from that hackathon that I had gone to was going to be on this plane. I knew someone from another event who was able to put me in touch with the organizers, and I was able to apply and get on this flight. And then the person who I had followed up with, she and I ended up being on the same team for this hackathon on a plane. It was a flight from San Francisco to London to build something. Our team ended up being successful on this flight. We ended up being one of the winning teams. And then we ended up going to speak at the United Nations. And then when I went to go speak at the United Nations, this person who I had met at that AT&T hackathon, she and I got to know each other, and she introduced me to some other folks. She's ended up, I've known her now since that hackathon. That was 7 years ago. And she has become one of my closest mentors, because not only does she introduce me to people, I'll introduce her to people. It's a two-way relationship. And we've just become such good friends, and we're able to advise each other on certain things. I'll ask her for help on asking for a raise, and she'll say, hey, could you connect me with this group of folks? I want to give a talk there or something. And it's an amazing way to build a relationship that could lead to so many career opportunities and just really solid friendships. And so following up and networking is very, very key. And there's also some good books on it that I can talk about soon too. But overall, remember, when you're interviewing, you will be great. Don't get too nervous, because there are so many jobs out there in tech, and especially in web dev now, that you will do well. And even if you flop on a few interviews, I have flopped on my fair share, you'll find something. And following these tips is useful. I do have this GitHub repo, github.com. Cassidy is my handle that I told you about before. And then Getting a Gig, that kind of goes over what I just talked about, but then gets a little bit more in the nitty gritty. That being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm gonna do stop sharing right here. But I wanted to see what questions were in the chat and kind of open it up for discussion. So let's see. You're the first person I know in the tech industry who has recommended writing a cover letter. Would you also recommend to write them for short-term positions like internships, or reserve them for full-time? Write them for every job. Every single job, write a cover letter for sure. It's absolutely important. Again, you never know who will be reading them. And for myself and for multiple people I know who do a lot of hiring, we read every single cover letter. And I'm not even a recruiter. I'm an engineer that has hired other engineers before. I've been a manager before, and we read every single cover letter, because it gives you a better picture of who you're about to talk to. Thoughts on single column CVs or double column CVs? I personally always have a double column resume. That's just my own personal preference. You can do whichever one fits your content better. I like to read double columns more, so that is why I prefer double columns. Can a computer science student these days realistically hope to get a remote position at a startup or bigger company? Yes. Surprisingly, I've been really impressed with how open a lot of companies have been about that. For example, my sister-in-law, she's actually in college right now as a computer science student, and she has an internship at a very large tech company that you have heard of, and they moved all of their internships remotely. And so she's doing a remote internship right now. And my company, for example, I work at Netlify. Netlify, you can host websites on there, and I can talk more about that if you want. We're remote first. And so we do have an office in San Francisco that you can go to, but everybody works remotely at least 4 days a week anyway. And it's a remote first company, and more companies are going remote first every single day. Like just in the past month, I saw that Shopify is now remote first, and Coinbase is now remote first. It's totally realistic to be able to get a job remotely. That being said, if you have the choice, which again, it's a pandemic, so there's a lot of things to consider here. I personally think that it's worth getting an in-person job first before getting a remote position. That was something that I didn't fully understand when I was first going into the industry. When I was first applying for jobs out of college, I did apply for remote roles because I wanted to live wherever I want. And I didn't get any, and it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because then when I did ultimately go into an office for my first few jobs, I got to meet a lot of people and learn a lot next to people and physically be there with people. And it was really, really useful. And now this is my third job that I've had that is fully remote, and I love it and it's great. But a lot of the skills that I have being a remote worker came from being an in-person worker first. So you can realistically hope to get a remote position, and companies are doing it all the time, especially now, and they're more open to it than ever before. You just gotta keep applying. What's your opinion on cold calling recruiters on LinkedIn? What would make you most likely to open a LinkedIn message from a stranger looking to connect? Recruiters, you can cold call them all you want. They love that. That is kind of their job, to get people to contact them. And so cold calling recruiters is great. Cold calling engineers, you're less likely to get a response. And that's just kind of how the industry is. If you want to get someone to open up a LinkedIn message, like if someone were to message me, I kind of rarely open up LinkedIn messages unless it's something very specific that I can answer quickly. Whenever you're cold calling anyone via email, via Twitter DM, via anything, you should come in not with just like a hello or hey, what's up? Or can I pick your brain? None of those give them any information. If you are reaching out to a person, again, on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, you should reach out and say, hi, my name is Cassidy, and I wanted to ask you a little bit of advice on formatting my resume. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I was not sure if I should put my experience or my skills first on my resume. Here's a screenshot. Would you mind looking at it? It's a very specific question, and that puts a lot less effort on the person you're reaching out to. If you just reach out saying, hey, I'd love to connect. I think we're a great fit because we're in the same industry, or something like that, that is not a motivating thing for someone to read, because they're just like, okay, well, this is the 10th message I've got that looks just like that today. This happens a lot. I was literally talking about this earlier today with a friend of mine, where she and I have been getting like 3 or 4 LinkedIn messages every morning from strangers who just want to connect. And as nice as I'm sure everybody is, that's just a lot of messages. There's a lot of people communicating. So if you want someone to stand out to you, whether you're reaching out to a recruiter or you're reaching out to an engineer, a hiring manager, something like that, be specific. If you see that a hiring manager is hiring, saying, hey, I'm interested in this role, I have my resume, here are my skills, I would love to chat more if you're available. And again, be specific. The more specific you are, the more likely you are to get a response. Let's see, single column CV, which is more compatible with ATS? I am not sure what ATS is. Could you spell that out for me, please? And if you have any other questions, let me know. I'm happy to also just keep shooting the breeze and talk about other things.
And you can also unmute too if you just want to answer the ATS question.
Yeah, I've heard Google prefers single column CVs. Is that true? They don't care. That isn't true. I have multiple friends. Of my friend group that I talk with the most, I would say 60 or 70% either work at Google or are still working at Google, and they all of their resumes look different. So the columns don't matter at all. Oh, applicant tracking systems. Yeah, here's the thing for applicant tracking systems. Those are both dumber and smarter than you think. If you're like uploading your resume and then you have to like manually check if things work, yes, single column CVs work really well with that. But a lot of times in the applicant tracking systems, they're just looking for keywords. And then after a certain number of keywords are met, then a recruiter will look at your resume as a human being. And so that isn't as that isn't as necessary as you'd think. Columns are not that important. But yeah, feel free to unmute or keep asking questions. In terms of where I am now, I touched on it very briefly. I'm at Netlify. I'm a principal developer experience engineer. That's my long fancy title. But the long and the short of it is I do web development at Netlify, and I give talks and write blog posts to help people learn how to use the Netlify platform more and develop with mostly React and Next.js. That's my specialty. And so I can talk a lot more about web things if you would like to learn more about that end of things. But yeah, feel free to type out anything. I'll also put a link to that GitHub repo that I mentioned too. Pop that in there and in there. So you can check that out if you'd like. Are there any other questions? Anybody doing anything fun for the weekend? Oh, architecture of Netlify. How does Netlify manage to the user's code safely? I'm not sure what you mean by that question. Do you mean like security, or do you mean like reliability? I'm not sure what you mean by that question. In terms of what Netlify does, you can host websites on there. Typically, they're Jamstack driven websites. And if you don't know what Jamstack is, it's JavaScript APIs markup. It's less of a stack and more of an architecture. I assume that people can write malicious code and then execute them on Netlify's servers when they deploy their websites. You know, that is true. People could do that. I admit I'm not on that side of things. One of my teammates is and has talked about before. There is a dedicated like security squad and team that handles those kinds of malicious things. There's whole sets of infrastructure that blocks malicious code and actual support engineers and support representatives who, if you report something, that will happen. But in terms of writing malicious code that executes on Netlify servers, it's something that there's a lot of guardrails against that. So it's not something that you would think is so bad. Whenever I think about security things that have happened at Netlify, it's rarely because of a hole in Netlify, but rather because of a hole in a separate API or system that people have connected to. Could you tell us about your career path leading up to Netlify? Yes, and so I have had quite the career bouncing around places. So I graduated in May 2014, 6 years ago, and I've had a lot of jobs since then. And so when I graduated school, I went to work at Venmo. If you know what Venmo is, that was my first role, and it was an unusual one because I wanted to be an engineer, but I also wanted to do a little bit more than engineering. I wanted to do some public speaking and help represent the company. And so I ended up becoming Venmo's first developer evangelist. And developer evangelists, developer advocates, developer relations, developer experience, these are all kind of under the same umbrella, where it's someone who knows how to communicate to developers, someone who is very technical, and someone who can build things so that way developers can understand how to code better, or to code with a specific set of technologies. And so with Venmo, when I had my job there, I was working on the actual application itself. I was actually a back-end engineer at Venmo. And I was also going to hackathons and conferences and meetups and talking about the Venmo API and showing people how to integrate that API into their applications. PayPal bought Venmo, which was very great and exciting for the company, but there came a point when I was a little more than a year in at Venmo where PayPal was starting to cut certain projects, and I was not happy about it because they were going to cut some of my projects and they were going to cut the Venmo API. And so as a result, I was living in New York City at the time. I started thinking about looking elsewhere, and at a meetup, I got to know this one person who he ended up being a startup founder of an artificial intelligence startup called Clarify. And as I got to talking to him, it kind of turned into a job interview. And then he offered me a role to lead developer relations at his company and to also do some web development for them too. And so that led me to go work at this company called Clarify. And Clarify was great. I ended up working with my sister there. She's also a software engineer. She's over at Facebook now. And it was a cool team because it was so small. When I first joined Venmo, it was about 50 people. When I first joined Clarify, I think I was employee 17. And so that one was very early on, and it was a really fun place to work, but I was getting sick of New York City. It just wasn't the city for me. And so I decided to move out to Seattle. And in Seattle, I didn't have as much of a network there. And so I literally just looked up lists of best places to work in Seattle and just applied to every company I could find. And the company I ended up going with was a small creative agency called L4 Digital, which no longer exists, sadly. L4 was an awesome place to work. It was super creative. I got to experiment with their 3D printers and laser cutters in-house and work on a bunch of different client projects. And they also allowed me to not only be an engineer, but also an engineering manager and manage a small team. And that was a really great time. And I loved L4. And then sadly, they were bought. And because they were bought, L4 was no more, and things were getting cut again. And so it was time for me to move on, and I wanted to get ahead of it before being laid off or something. So from L4, I ended up interviewing at Amazon and started working at Amazon. And for Amazon, I was working on the Amazon Echo. I don't want to say Alexa because mine will hear me. But anyway, I was working on the Amazon Echo there. And my fancy title there was Head of Developer Voice Programs, which was kind of a developer evangelism role again, but it was more about getting feedback from developers and bringing it to the product team, and then the product team building features that I would work with, give them feedback, and then I would introduce those features to developers. And that was a great time. I liked it, except the culture at Amazon I did not like. The job was interesting, but unfortunately the culture was really frustrating to work with. And so I ended up leaving after 7 months. And honestly, I probably should have even left sooner, but I wanted to stick it out, and the culture was not a good fit for me. And so after Amazon, I went and worked for Venmo, or not Venmo, just already talked about that. I went and worked for CodePen. And so CodePen is a really small, fully remote team. So it ended up being my first remote job. And that team, I think we were 8 people. And we built on CodePen. And CodePen's a pretty big website for 8 people to manage. And so there was a lot to do on that. I was doing just straight engineering at CodePen, and I was converting a lot of the website from Ruby on Rails to React and helping build out some new monolith repos and doing a lot of feature work and stuff. And I really liked it. It was a cool small team, and I loved working from home. And after a while, after about a year, a little more than a year, I was starting to realize as much as I loved CodePen and the product and the team, I was really missing talking with developers. And I reached out, or rather, my next boss, spoiler alert, his name is Ryan Florence. He reached out to me asking if I would help teach some workshops for developers. And I thought it sounded like a blast. And as I talked with him more, he was just going to have me do it as like a side gig. And then I asked if I could do it full time. And that's kind of how I went over, and it was a small company called React Training. And so there were 5 of us working remotely, and we would build content to teach developers how to work on React and how to build your React applications better. And I was traveling constantly, like 2 or 3 times a month and more, to go teach workshops and speak at events. And it was a great time. And then coronavirus happened, sadly. And I was giving a talk in France in February. I gave a talk at a conference there. Then I went to Ireland from there. And then I was going to go home for 3 days and then go to Spain. And literally in those 3 days before I was about to go to Spain, everything went nuts. And that's when the virus hit. And so suddenly my conference in Spain was canceled. My workshop in Spain was canceled. Then my company was canceled, meaning every workshop that our company tried to teach sadly got canceled, and as a result they couldn't afford to pay us anymore. And so sadly the company went under, and they had to lay everybody off. And luckily, earlier in this past year and the year before, I had interacted with a bunch of really cool developers at conferences and events. And so as soon as I found out that my role was going to be eliminated, I just reached out to all my contacts and I said, okay, I'd love to interview at your company, and I want to be able to figure this out before I need to panic about finances and stuff. And that is when my now boss, Sarah Drasner, she was just like, you know what, I loved your work at this conference and this conference, and just talking to you online, let's get you in an interview loop. And that is how I interviewed and then got to Netlify, where I am today. And I think in 2 days, I'm at 2 months at Netlify. And so that's where I've been. It's been quite the journey of a lot of companies getting bought and things switching around, but it's been a great experience, and I don't regret any of the roles that I've had. There have been questions since I started talking. And is it true that Amazon overworks their developers? It depends on the team. Sadly, I was on a team that overworked some people and didn't treat some people well. I'm trying to be a little politically correct here. Certain people were not treated as well as other certain people on my team. And so it really depends on the team. Some people at Amazon loved their job and didn't feel overworked at all. And I have some friends who have been at Amazon for 5 or 6 years and they love their team. So it really depends. What inspires my skits? For those that don't know, I make silly short videos and TikToks and stuff on Twitter. And I am inspired by my pain because I'm mostly making development jokes. How do I prepare for interviews? It depends. It depends on the job I'm applying for. A lot of times it is going through algorithms questions and figuring certain things out. For example, when I was, depending on the role you're applying for, interviews can change. With Netlify, for example, because I was applying for a more senior role, they didn't so much go for like, can you do this sorting algorithm questions, but more about architecture of system questions. And so they would ask how I would architect out a system and my opinions on the Jamstack and previous projects I've worked on, and talking about working with teams and stuff, because I'm in more of a leadership role. So it was still technical, but a different kind of technical. Meanwhile, for example, when I interview at a place like Google will always ask algorithm questions. They never ask anything about your personality whatsoever, even if it's, every role. And what's funky about Google, I'm not trying to bash them, but this is true. You don't necessarily know what your interviewer will know, and you won't necessarily be interviewing with your team when you do your on-site. And so, for example, I applied for a front-end engineering role, and then when I was interviewing with Google, all of my interviewers except for one didn't even know JavaScript, and they just asked straight algorithm questions, and then that's what it was. And they actually, my sister was an interviewer at Google, and she said in the training, they're just like, you don't show your personality, don't try to get to know them, just get the code. And so it really varies on where you're interviewing, what the interview experience will be. And I personally have learned that I don't like big companies as much. And so I go for smaller companies typically, and those interviews tend to be more practical based on the job rather than algorithmy. What kind of culture do you look for before joining a new team? I look for a culture that allows you to be free with what you want to do outside of work. And meaning there are some companies that I've worked for where they did not like that I did side projects. Even if the side projects had nothing to do with work, I like to commit to GitHub. Someone asked, are those mechanical keyboards? I love building mechanical keyboards. And places like Amazon, they asked me why I was building mechanical keyboards so much, as if this was going to take away from my job. And it was weird. And there are certain companies that will say, if you work on a side project while you work for us, we own your side project. I steer very clear of those. Some people I know, they don't like doing side projects, so that doesn't matter to them. So personally, because I really like building side projects, code and non-code related, I look for a team that will allow me to do that sort of work, that will allow me to kind of be myself on Twitter and be silly and everything, and not kind of just a robot that only retweets what the company tweets. And I also look for a good work-life balance. When I was at Venmo and Clarify in particular, when I was earlier in my career, I burnt out really hard. I said yes to way too many things, which was fun, and I felt like it was good for my career, but it ended up just really setting me back because I would burn out and just feel terrible and be so overwhelmed and not be able to perform at work. And luckily the people I worked with were very empathetic to that, but I look for a place that doesn't encourage overworking, which a lot of startups do that. And so you kind of have to watch out for work-life balance. Whenever I interview and I say, so what's your work-life balance like? They might say, well, it's a startup. When you hear that, that means they don't have work-life balance. when they say, oh, well, our work-life balance is great. We have a lot of parents who want to be with their kids. We have a lot of people who have a lot of hobbies outside of work. That's what you want to hear, not, well, it's a startup, if you're looking for work-life balance. If you don't mind working all the time, that might be good for you. Yeah, so those mechanical keyboards in the background. I build mechanical keyboards a lot. This is like my hobby of choice. I think I've got 14 next to me. They're great. I love them. They're my hobby of choice. How do you approach people for referrals? I message them and I say, hey, I noticed that your company had an opening for this job. I would like to apply for it. Would you mind referring me? And then if they say yes, I give them my resume. That is how I do it. It's pretty straightforward. Typically, some people get uncomfortable referring people unless they know who you are. Some people are just like, oh yeah, I'll refer you. Yeah, I'll refer you. People at big companies like Amazon, for example, Amazon, they pay their engineers money to refer people. If for example, my sister, she referred me to Amazon when I was applying, and she worked at Amazon too. My sister's also been at a lot of places. And even though that didn't give me like a leg up or anything, because she referred me and connected me to the recruiter, she got rewarded for it. And I think you can get between like $1,000 and $5,000 depending on the company that you're talking to. I know, for example, when I was at Venmo, and again, it was bought by PayPal, I think they gave us like $1,000 and a t-shirt if you refer an engineer and they get hired. So people are often pretty dang open to referrals depending on the company that they work for. Smaller startups, it's a little bit harder if you don't know them very well, because they don't want to refer someone that they barely know. But for big companies, it's pretty easy to get referrals purely because you just reach out to someone you have a connection with and ask them straight up. Are there any other questions? These have all been great.
I say, Cassidy, this is the like biggest topic that a lot of our fellows is looking for, is a lot of career advice. So this has been really helpful so far.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I'm an open book, so feel free to ask whatever you want, because I've applied to a lot of roles. One of the things that I do is, even if I'm happy in a job, I'll keep interviewing on occasion sometimes, which I promise I don't dislike myself, but it's good practice. Being able to interview and continually to just stretch that muscle, that is really helpful, because when you actually are looking for a job, you can kind of cruise a bit more through your interviews rather than just cramming and then kind of pushing it all out. It's a muscle that you have to flex. And I've had my fair share of rejections, but I've also had my fair share of acceptances because I keep practicing interviewing. And it's a good skill to have.
One question that has been posed on our Discord channel is really about when you're getting started early on in your career, especially when you're going from college. So what was that like from a recruiter standpoint? Did you attend recruiting fairs? What did that look like, more in depth from where you were, but also to a lot of your friends and also network?
Yeah, and so when I was in my senior year of college and I was starting to apply for jobs, I started applying before the school year even started. I started applying for full-time jobs in August before classes started. And my personal goal that I had for myself was I want to have a full-time job set before Halloween, so that way I can kind of not have to think about it anymore and just take finals and be done. And so start applying right away and apply everywhere. Apply anyway. If you meet only some of the criteria of a job description, apply for it. Because it's a numbers game. If you apply to 30 jobs, you might only get like 3 interviews and you might get as many as 10, but just apply anyway and apply often. I think for my senior year, I think I applied to something like 80 to 100 roles, and that led to a lot of different interviews, and I ended up with 10 job offers by mid-October. And that isn't to brag, because if you think about it, that's only a 10% acceptance rate of all of the jobs that I've done, or all of the interviews that I've done, but it's a numbers game. Chances are you will get a role if you just apply a ton, especially out of college, because you have such a leg up in the industry to have some kind of degree and education behind you, and some kind of experience. There's a lot of people out there who are self-taught, and it's a great thing to be able to self-teach or self-code, but it's harder to sell that. But when you have an education behind you, then that is a really great in for certain roles. And career fairs and recruiting fairs, those are great, because it's a really great way to shop your resume around. But a lot of times what I do is I just went to job boards and I thought, okay, what's a tech company I like? I'll look them up. Oh, they're hiring, great. And just come up with a list of all the tech companies you can think of, and the ones that you would want to work for, and just go for it and apply. It's a work. It's work. Some people say it's a full-time job to interview for jobs, but it's worth it to get options, because then once you have options, even if you really want one and you have an offer from another and you're not sure about another, you never know what a company might bring to the table that you had never fully considered before as like a dream role or anything. And then also from a negotiating point of view, you could say, okay, I really want to work for you, but also I have this offer, and they're paying a bit more, and I got to pay off student loans. I have rent to pay, this and that. Would you mind helping me out? And it's a great negotiation tactic. And so apply a lot, I guess, is my biggest advice, whether it's from recruiting or just looking stuff up online.
Perfect. And it looks like there's another question added in the chat.
Yes, let's see. How long do you advise an engineer work with a company before starting to look again? This has changed over time. Typically, I try to stay at a place at least a year before even considering moving anywhere else. But that varies. Again, I was at Amazon for 7 months, and that was a special case. I just did not like working there. I always go into a company hoping that I'll stay there. And every time I have left a company, it's because of some circumstance that led me to go. I've known some people where they leave a company after 2 months because it just wasn't a fit. And that doesn't affect your job hunting as much as you would think, as much as it used to, if you can give a good reason why you're hopping around. And I think that's the key there. It's okay to job hop if you have a good reason for it. And I had a lot of reasons for my various job hopping. Let's see, what has your experience been with working remotely versus working in person? So this is a very good question, because this was something I was nervous about when I went to go work remotely, but I was excited to try it. Working in person is great because you have a lot of opportunities for like water cooler conversations, quote unquote, where you're just walking in the office, you're just like, hey, how's it going? Oh, you're working on that project? Cool. And you can kind of just gab very, very casually. For remote companies, you have to be a lot more intentional about making friends at work, about getting to know certain people, about building connections, and about communicating overall. Things can be kind of a bit more casual when you go into the office, purely because communication can be heard in various spots. But with remote work, you might have a team that's very globally distributed. You need to write everything down. Every single meeting, even if everybody has been there, you write it down. Every single decision that has been made, it has to be written down. And I think communication is the biggest thing that you have to consider when working remotely, because for example, if you're a junior developer going into a remote company for the first time, you might not know what to ask because it might not be written down somewhere, or you're not entirely sure how to look for something, or you might get an onboarding where they'll say, okay, we're mailing you your laptop. Let us know if you need help getting set up. And that's all you get. Meanwhile, if you were doing that in person for the first time, you could say, okay, when you say getting set up, what should I be installing? You can do that remotely, but it's a different communication way. I personally love working remotely. I feel like I get a lot more done in a shorter amount of time. So I have more chances to chat on Discord with folks, chat on Slack with coworkers. And I think I get my tasks done probably 50% faster, honestly, because I'm able to just get it focused, not have someone come by and say, hey, how's it going? Because I'm working at my desk at home. I have been spoiled and I don't want to ever work in an office again if I can help it. Let's see. How do you manage dropping motivation to work? Yeah, this past Tuesday was a rough one. I did not want to work on Tuesday. You know, the best way that I've found to manage that is, first of all, I have a physical notebook of to-do list items where typically if I'm at like a decent level of motivation, I'll have like an online to-do list or something, it'll be fine. When I'm having a struggling day, I have a physical to-do list where I write down, this is what I have to get done today. And sometimes it's really, really small things where it's just like, go to this meeting. It's a task that I don't have to do myself. It's something that's just on my calendar, but checking something off gives your brain just that much motivation where you're just like, oh, I kind of want to check something else off and go and go and go. The handling dropping motivation is real, especially when working remotely. And so it's very, very key to have small tasks in addition to the big tasks that you can do. So that way you can kind of keep yourself going and build that momentum. What's your routine for remote work to avoid overworking and underworking? Very good point. I have a separate space for my desk, and I think that is a really big aspect of it. And so I have a work computer that's a Mac, and then my personal computer is a desktop PC. And so when I want to work and when I'm working during working hours, I'm on my laptop. And as soon as my workday is done, I close that laptop and I have that physical separation. I'll go over to my kitchen, I'll go over and sit on the couch, and I am avoiding my work computer as much as possible. That is how I avoid overworking. It doesn't always work. A couple days ago, I brought my work computer to the couch and I kind of kept accidentally working, but I was also motivated, so that's good. In terms of underworking, again, having a separate space really helps, because then you're just like, okay, because I'm in this office, I am in work mode. And also, it sounds silly, but getting dressed every day really helps. For myself, today I'm wearing sweatpants, so it doesn't really count. But I still try to put on clothes every single day. I go into my office because I'm going to work, and kind of having that mindset going into it, it keeps you going, and it's that much motivation to put effort in because you've already put effort into your initial routine in the day.
All right, I think, we're wrapping up close to time here. This has been a really great conversation and a lot of wonderful questions. If there's any other questions, about 3 or so minutes left, we probably have time for one question if anyone else would like to unmute and ask their question.
And then if you have some later, you can message me on Twitter or something. If I don't reply to you right away, ping me again, but I will try to answer your questions if you ask me some.
I think that's probably it for now. This was really helpful, and you're getting some amazing talks and everything in the chat. So it was a great opportunity for our fellows to hear from industry experts.
And thank you so much for having me. It was really great talking with everyone. You had great questions, friends.